So thanks, Kelly and Wakasa, for having this webinar on male survivors, and we always are excited to partner with Wakasa in any way that we can, because I think we have very similar missions and similar pushes to get info out there. So thanks for the opportunity. Let me start with just a little bit about Who Forges, since some of you probably don't know who we are and what we do. We're a transgender organization that is national in our range and our reach, and we do mostly work with service providers, victim service providers, and a little bit of our time is spent doing direct services with transgender and non-binary survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and other related crimes. So let me share just a couple of things about our background and our foundational principles. We kind of do all of our work under two foundational principles, and it really guides our work. So when we're engaging with both survivors and providers, our first goal is to approach this work through a trauma-informed lens. The second foundational principle, again, in how we work both with survivors and with providers, is to focus on empowerment through highlighting resilience, building on existing knowledge, and promoting a sense of confidence. I kind of, am shy about pushing out social media links, but we want to share our social media with you because social media is social, and it's our primary way that we can share new publications, new trainings, new events, and we can also connect with you all and enhance, upraise your voices as well. So please find us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Let me give you just a little bit of a snapshot about what we offer. So again, we work predominantly with victim service providers, and most of what we do with victim service providers is training and technical assistance. We also write a fair number of publications, both short little fact sheets as well as really long guides. We've done some site visits, so when people really want to get more in depth about how to better serve trans or non-binary survivors. We have staff that works on policy, both on the national level as well as state and local. And we do a lot of referrals to connect providers with people in their communities that can better help their trans clients. For trans clients, we also offer a bunch of publications that are, everything that we offer for clients is virtual, so it's online, it's through the phone. We also offer peer-to-peer connection for folks. A survivors blog is going to be rolling out really soon, specifically for trans survivors. And we offer a lot of information and referral and support to survivors across the country. I wanted to highlight just two things before we get into the substance of what I'd like to share with you today. And the first highlight is around our webinars. So like Wakasa, we record our webinars, and we have over 50 hours of free webinars for you all to listen to, learn, use in your teams, to train, and then talk about. So a couple of them I wanted to highlight for you are, we've got a really nice basic Trans Survivors, a 101 for Advocates. We worked with the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs and did Violence Against Women Non-Discrimination Conditions, which might be really helpful around when we're looking at male survivors and what kind of non-discrimination provisions we all have to work under. Another one that might be of interest to folks is forensic exams. And then a couple months ago, we did a webinar with the Washington Coalition, Washington State Coalition, on trans youth and sexual assault. So lots of options for different kinds of webinars. We also have some survivor resources, and we're really thrilled that in the last year we were finally able to put out 4 really long and substantial guides for trans survivors, for partners of trans survivors, and for trans community members. And one of the exciting things is that within a longer guide we were able to talk about things like the anatomy of trauma and neurobiology, and some things that have a really trans-specific lens to that work. So we encourage you to look at those both for your clients as well as possibly for you to better understand where trans survivors are coming from. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you today a little bit of a sneak preview of some research that we did in 2016, and it's on gender-integrated support groups. So again, this is just a little sneak preview, and hopefully it will excite you as much as it excites me. We were funded through Reliance, which is funds that were coming through the National Football League. So gives me hope that sports can actually do something really great. So as many of you know, support groups for sexual assault survivors have historically been for women only, specifically for non-transgender women. In recent years, some groups, like Gina was just mentioning, have developed male support groups. Usually they're intended for non-trans men. As we know, though, sexual assault can happen to men and transgender people at similar, if not higher rates than non-transgender women. But we often continue to deny group support to people who are of other genders other than non-trans women. So I know most of you on the call probably know the benefits of group support, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of the places that we see group support as being really beneficial in addition to or instead of individual therapy or self-help modalities. So we definitely see that there's a decrease in post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms when there's group support, and it oftentimes shortens the duration of PTSD. Group support can also help individuals develop skills that help with their healing from sexual assault and abuse. It can provide community and connection with other survivors, which sometimes that alone can be tremendously meaningful for survivors. Group support can also dispel myths by allowing survivors to hear other people's stories and struggles and triumphs. Group support can obviously reduce isolation just by the very nature of being in the same space with other survivors. And groups can validate what survivors have lived through and support their healing process, normalizing the steps that they're taking along the way. So those are some of the obvious benefits that we see in support groups, and that sometimes is not available to people other than non-trans women. Forge really strongly believes that it's critical for organizations and providers to move towards creating and facilitating all gender support groups for a couple of different reasons. First reason is that men, trans individuals, and non-binary people experience sexual violence and deserve access to support groups. We feel that all survivors deserve the opportunity to benefit from this type of healing. As stigma around sexual assault shifts in our culture, more male survivors are seeking services. Likewise, just as more providers are increasing their cultural competency and knowledge and awareness of trans individuals, more trans survivors are also seeking services. As non-binary populations grow, and non-binary populations really are growing quite rapidly, more non-binary survivors will be seeking group support as well. And one thing to note with non-binary survivors, of course, is that if groups are just for men or just for women, non-binary folks can't bring their full selves into those groups. And of course, there's also a legal or policy reason that would encourage us to move in the direction of integrated groups. And those are the non-discrimination provisions, like those in the Violence Against Women Act or HHS or many other federal or state funders or institutions that require organizations to offer equal services to people of all genders. So a little snapshot about the project that we did in this year. We're in the middle of the year. We collected data through an online survey, and we were looking for some support group facilitators who had conducted groups that were for all genders or were integrated in some way around gender. We had 97 responses, so not a huge number, but some really, really rich responses in those 97. We asked folks if they would be interested in being interviewed, and about a fifth of those people, around 20%, said yes, that they would be interviewed, and we had some really lovely interviews that resulted in a lot of interesting information. Some of the outputs of this project are the creation of a guide for facilitators to creating gender-integrated groups. So that will be out in probably May or June, and then in June we'll be presenting at the National Sexual Assault Coalition, no, not the National Sexual Assault Conference in Dallas, specifically on this project, and then we'll be following up with a webinar that will help facilitators learn about what's in the guide as well as some practical skills and solutions. What we've found in our research is that the core and overwhelming result of the survey and the interviews is that gender-integrated support groups are easy. It really isn't a big deal to do gender integration. Some groups started out and have remained gender-integrated, while others have emerged over time. For all, though, it proved that doing gender-integrated support groups were easy and beneficial both to survivors and to staff. Many agencies have expanded their support groups in ways that are inclusive of all genders of survivors. So they haven't expanded their support groups out of fears or concerns or projections about what will happen if men and women are in the same group, or if men, women, and trans people are all in the same group. What we found, though, are that some of those main concerns that facilitators had ended up being more myths than truths. So I'd like to share with you 4 common concerns or worries or assumptions that many people had about gender integration in support groups, and also then share with you some experiences of seasoned facilitators who've been running those groups that kind of counter those assumptions. So there's a widely held belief that women will feel unsafe around men. So people who work with anti-sexual violence organizations and systems often are exceptionally mindful of being aware of people's feelings and trying to create as safe as possible of a support structure. So let's look at this assumption first, that women will feel unsafe around men in support groups, by taking a peek at what support group facilitators said who do run integrated groups. In reality, gender-integrated support group facilitators remind us that not all perpetrators are male, so blanket statements that women will feel unsafe around men won't hold true if she's had a female offender. That assumption may also scare away women whose perpetrators were female, or anybody whose perpetrator was female, who might fear other group members or that facilitators will deny their experiences or stigmatize them. For those people who did have a male offender, being in a group that is created to be safe and structured can really be healing, seeing that not all men are dangerous. Integrated groups also allow for group members to see the commonalities of survivorship, which can, in and of itself, be one way to create a sense of safety and unity and healing. So for each of these assumption experience pairs, I'd like to share a quick quote from the survey or interviews with you. So this first quote says, survivors can be hesitant to engage in a group that includes members of the gender that hurt them. But we have discussed that as an opportunity to communicate about concerns and boundaries and rebuild trust with others. So a second assumption that is often made is that groups that are comprised of many genders of survivors, that they need to have both a male and a female co-facilitator structure. And the reality, of course, is that there are more than 2 genders. So some support groups have always had more than one facilitator, but the gender of those facilitators is likely far less important than the skills in creating a place where survivors can heal and learn and grow. Keep in mind, too, that gender is just one of many, many, many attributes that survivors bring to the group. So a quote around this pair is, if you feel like your facilitators need to represent every single identity of your group members, then you're going to need as many facilitators as you have group members, and probably more, because there's not going to be a complete representation, and because I believe there are infinite gender identities. So a third common assumption is that facilitators need cultural competency training. Well, cultural competency training is essential and it's important across many areas. Facilitators who work with survivors will strengthen their effectiveness as clinicians or advocates if they enhance their knowledge about gender, about sexual orientation, about race, about age, about class, about disability, about religion, as well as learning more about things like trauma and neurobiology or alternative healing modalities or adult learning techniques, and so much more. It's also incredibly important for facilitators to address their own biases or phobias. This is important before facilitating as well as something to be constantly aware of. More important and specific cultural competency training, though, is training on active listening. When facilitators can listen fully and be present without judgment, clients will feel heard and validated. So a quote for this one, facilitators have to be open, humble, and well-versed in issues that may come up, and well-versed in people that don't identify in the same way that they do. So the last assumption and experience I'd like to share with you today is the belief that there needs to be more than one of each identity in a group for people to feel comfortable or able to feel included. The reality is that every person has thousands of identities. There's literally no way that a group could be comprised of people who all had the same or similar identities. What many support group leaders are finding is that sometimes the contrast between individuals in a group can actually help people see how they're alike, for example, in their survivorship, in their resilience, or in their ability to learn skills to heal from trauma. Here's what one leader said. One group I facilitated was all female and one transgender male. He expressed his initial concern about fear of not fitting in, but at the end of the first session, he no longer had fear and felt comfortable. The core and overwhelming result of the survey and the interviews that we conducted, as well as our discussions with agencies across the country, is that gender-integrated support groups are easy. It really isn't a big deal. And I really want to stress that because I think people fear that it's going to be very difficult. And what people are finding is that it's not difficult. Some groups started out and remain gender integrated, while others have emerged over time. For all, though, it's proved to be easy and beneficial both to survivors and to staff. Let me leave you with one last quote. And the quote says, "There are so many different experiences, so many different identities, and everybody deserves to feel safe. So if we're not part of that solution, then we are part of the problem. So I would hope that people would want to be part of the solution." And just a quick reminder of where folks can find us and find more resources. Our website address is on the top of this slide, so forge-forward.org. And we encourage you to come hang out on our website and again, find us on social media so that we can connect with you and learn from each other. Thanks very much for having me be part of this section.